right, strap in everyone, because today we are taking a deep dive into Blade Runner territory. And let me tell you, the stuff you sent over, really interesting stuff. We're not going to rehash those same old, is Deckard a replicant arguments? Nope. We're going way deeper, challenging those classic postmodern interpretations, unearthing, well, some pretty profound themes.
Yeah, the approach these articles take is, it's pretty refreshing, isn't it? Instead of seeing Blade Runner as just this mirror, reflecting all our anxieties about technology, about who we are, it kind of nudges us to see it as a screen instead.
Screen. Okay, now I'm really curious. So not just reflecting our world back at us, but actually like reshaping the very questions we ask about it.
Exactly. The authors really take issue with those standard postmodern readings of Blade Runner, the ones that get stuck on things like urban decay, fractured identities, the whole blurring of lines between what's real and what's a simulation.
Right, right. I've definitely come across those interpretations before. The decaying cityscape, the replicants, seemingly wanting to be more human, all the uncertainty around that Voight-Kampff test.
Yeah.
Pretty standard postmodern fare, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. And the articles even point to specific examples from the film, like that mishmash of architecture in LA, the replicants yearning for, well, a longer lifespan, and of course, the whole way the Voight-Kampff test is used to kind of figure out what's real and what's artificial.
Okay, so help me on here. If those interpretations are so common, why are these authors pushing back against them so hard?
Well, they argue that those readings, while, they might seem kind of appealing at first, that they don't really, they don't fully capture what Blade Runner's doing. They sort of miss the mark.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's the mark they're missing?
It's all about this idea of, and I know this sounds a bit jargony, otherwise than being towards death.
Otherwise than being towards the... All right, lay it on me.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know. But it basically refers to a state of being that that kind of breaks free from the limits of both human and replicant existence. It's not about fitting into the boxes we already have. It's about smashing those boxes all together. And the authors are convinced that this is exactly what the replicants, especially Roy Batty, are striving for.
Whoa, okay. So you're telling me the replicants, they're not just yearning to be human. Their desire, it goes beyond that, towards something else entirely.
You got it. They're not just pale imitations trying to become the real deal. They're pointing towards a whole new way of being, something that really shakes up, our understanding of life, death, the whole shebang.
That is mind-blowing. So how does it explore this otherwise than being towards death? I mean, does it give us any hints about what this state of being might actually look like?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The authors say the film, it doesn't give us a straight answer, but it uses all these different elements, like the replicant's actions, the symbolism of the eye, that ambiguous ending. They're all pointing us towards this possibility.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond the typical postmodern takes. It's not just holding up a mirror to our anxieties about technology, about who we are, but it's cracking open these new ways of thinking about, I don't know, about existing, being alive, about wanting something more than the limits we usually take for granted.
Absolutely. The authors even go so far as to say that Blade Runner, the film itself, it's like a Voight-Kampff test for the audience. It challenges us to confront our own, our own assumptions, our own limits.
And hold on, the Voight-Kampff test. But isn't that all about, like, drawing lines between humans and replicants, about reinforcing those boundaries? How could that possibly be challenging the audience?
Well, you see, the authors make this really fascinating argument about the Voight-Kampff test. They say that instead of just detecting difference, it's actually working to exterminate difference.
Exterminate, that's a pretty loaded word.
Yeah.
So how does a test that's supposed to, categorize, how does that end up erasing those very categories it's based on?
By leaning on these arbitrary distinctions and creating this atmosphere of constant uncertainty. Think about it. The whole test, it's fixated on the eye, like the eye holds the key to the soul or something. But then the image of the eye itself, it's manipulated by the machine, right? It always shows up green no matter what the actual color is.
Yeah, that's always kind of bugged me. The test is supposed to be all objective, scientific even, but there's something about that whole eye thing that feels, I don't know, off, like it's symbolic or something.
Yeah, exactly. And the questions they ask, they're all about triggering these emotional responses, but how you interpret those responses, well, that's totally subjective. So you have this test that, on the surface, seems to offer certainty. But under the hood, it's all probabilities and interpretations, which is exactly what breeds this, what the authors call this ambient fear.
Because no one can ever be totally sure, right? Not of their own identity, not of anyone else's. So the test, instead of giving answers, it just throws up more questions, more anxieties.
Exactly. And this ambiguity, this blurring of the lines, that's precisely what the authors see as Blade Runner's radical potential. It's not about neat answers or upholding the categories we're used to. It's about forcing us to face the fact that existence, well, it's inherently uncertain.
So we're talking about a film that uses a test designed to categorize, separate, define. But in doing so, it actually ends up kind of exposing, I don't know, the flaws in those very categories. It's like Blade Runner saying, hey, look closer. These neat distinctions you've created, maybe they're not so neat after all.
Yeah, exactly. And this brings us to Roy Batty, the leader of those renegade replicants, arguably the most complex, the most fascinating character in the whole film.
Oh, absolutely. He's terrifying, tragic, this brilliant creation, but so brutal, desperate for something more than that short lifespan they've given him.
Right, and his actions, particularly his final confrontation with Tyrell, his creator, they're really key to understanding how the film grapples with that whole otherwise than being towards death idea.
You know, that scene, every time, it leaves me speechless. The desperation in Roy's voice when he's begging Tyrell for more life, and then that rage, almost primal, when he realizes there's no more time. It's heartbreaking.
It is, and the author suggests we look at Roy's actions through this lens of what they call symbolic exchange.
Symbolic exchange. Fill me in.
So it's the idea that every interaction, every gift, every exchange, it creates a debt, an obligation. And in the context of Blade Runner, the authors argue that the replicants' very existence is like this gift of labor, a debt they owe to the corporation that made them.
So they're stuck in this cycle, right? Of debt, obligation, forced to work for this society that sees them as, well, disposable.
Exactly. And that predetermined lifespan, that 4-year limit, it's this constant reminder that they're just commodities, tools to be used and then tossed aside.
So where does Roy killing Tyrell fit into all this symbolic exchange idea? Is it just revenge?
I think it's more complicated than that. The authors argue that Roy's act of patricide, killing his father, it's a symbolic rejection of the entire system. He's refusing to play by the rules, to accept that gift of a life designed for, well, servitude, exploitation.
So he's breaking free, even if it means embracing violence, self-destruction even.
Right. It's like he's saying, you gave me life, but on your terms, now I'm taking control of my own death on my terms. And this defiance, this refusal to just submit, it's a core part of his quest for that otherwise than being towards death.
So it's not about just living longer, it's about taking back control, asserting his right to exist outside the limits set by his creators.
Precisely. And this is where the connection between Roy's actions and that Voight-Kampff test gets really interesting. Just like the test tries to exterminate difference by forcing these artificial categories, Roy's act of killing Tyrell, it disrupts those categories, smashes the neat divisions between human and replicant, creator and creation.
You know, now that you mention it, there's another moment where Roy, he defies those categories, steps outside the role he's been assigned. That scene where he saves Deckard's life.
Yes, that scene. So crucial and often overlooked. It's the moment Roy truly transcends his programming. Shows a capacity for empathy, compassion, something we don't even see in the human characters.
I mean, Deckard, he's hanging there completely helpless at Roy's mercy. And Roy, he pulls him up, saves him.
Yeah.
Total reversal, right? You expect the monster to go for the kill, but he shows mercy instead.
Exactly. And that act of mercy, saving the very person who's been hunting him, it's a profound disruption of that symbolic exchange. Remember, the replicants, they're supposed to be indebted to their creators, bound to serve, but by saving Deckard, Roy's wiping that slate clean, breaking free from those chains of obligation.
It's like he's saying, I'm not defined by your categories, your expectations, your rules. I'm something else, something more.
Exactly. And those final moments with the dove flying away as he dies, it reinforces that idea of transcendence, like his spirit's breaking free from his artificial body, soaring beyond those limitations, human, replicant, all of it.
Powerful imagery, beautiful and haunting. And it brings us back to that screen versus mirror idea. Blade Runner, it's not just reflecting our anxieties about technology, AI, all that. It's showing us something else entirely, something that goes beyond the categories, the limits we usually just accept without thinking.
It's showing us the possibility of something truly otherwise.
That's huge. And it makes me wonder about Deckard. Where does he fit into all of this? He's the one hunting the replicants, retiring them. But his journey, it seems like it's just as much about him figuring himself out as it is about getting rid of the other.
It's a great question, and one that the film, especially with those multiple endings, leaves open for us to ponder.
Yeah, And that's part of what makes Blade Runner so captivating. It doesn't hand us easy answers. It makes us wrestle with that ambiguity, that uncertainty that's at the core of, well, being human.
And the authors, they suggest that Deckard's journey, his encounters with the replicants, they lead him to question the very foundation of his own identity, of everything he thinks is true.
So he's not just hunting replicants, he's hunting for himself, for a deeper understanding of what it means to be human in a world where those lines are getting blurrier and blurrier.
Exactly. And his relationship with Rachel, a replicant who thinks she's human, that just adds another layer of complexity to his understanding of those boundaries.
Their relationship, so fascinating, all that tension, those unspoken desires, like they're both reaching for something they can't even name, something beyond the categories they've been given.
And that ending, particularly in the director's cut, that sense of possibility, of escape.
Yeah, that final shot, them driving through the countryside, it's like they're breaking free from that city, venturing into the unknown. But you're right, there's also that lingering uncertainty. Are they really free? Or are they just putting off the inevitable?
And then uncertainty, it's intentional. Blade Runner, it thrives on ambiguity, challenges us to confront those uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the world we live in. It's not about giving us the answers. It's about asking those tough questions.
Questions about who we are, what it means to be human, about reality itself, a lot to unpack. But I gotta say, I'm loving this deep dive, seeing Blade Runner in a whole new light.
Me too. And luckily, there's still more to uncover.
Okay, so we're back. And I gotta say, my head's still spinning a little from all this Blade Runner talk. We've covered some serious ground, from those classic postmodern interpretations to that whole idea of the film as a screen, projecting possibilities instead of just being a mirror to our anxieties.
It's a lot to process, for sure, but I think we're starting to see the film in a new way, one that goes beyond those usual categories and readings.
You know, one thing that keeps popping up in these articles is that motif of the eye. It's everywhere, right? The Voight-Kampff machine, those glowing replicant eyes, even the city itself, it kind of looks like a giant eye, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The eye is like front and center in the film's visuals, and it's totally tied to those themes we've been talking about. The author suggests that we think of the eye as this, well, this place of both control and resistance.
Control and resistance. Okay, now that's an interesting combo. So how does the eye represent both of those things?
Well, think about that Voight-Kampff test again. It fixates on the eye, right? Trying to see into it, read those emotional responses, figure out if someone's authentic, if they're the real deal. It's a tool for categorizing, controlling, separating humans from replicants.
Right, and you mentioned earlier how the machine itself, it messes with the image of the eye, always making it green on that screen. Like the technology is forcing its own interpretation, distorting what we see as real.
Exactly. And that distortion, that manipulation, that's key to understanding the eye as a symbol of control. It represents those forces that want to define us, put us in boxes, limit what we can be.
Okay, I get that. But you said the eye is also about resistance. How does that work?
Well, what about those glowing replicant eyes? They're a sign of their artificiality, a way for humans to spot them, control them. But at the same time, those eyes, they also show us their unique perspective, the way they see the world, which is different from how humans see it.
It's like those eyes, they're both a symbol of being oppressed and a potential way to break free.
Right on. The authors argue that the eye in Blade Runner, it represents that struggle, the struggle between those who want to control us, define us, and those who fight back against those limits, who want to see beyond the boxes they've been put in.
So the eye becomes this battleground where order and chaos are clashing.
Precisely. And the film, it doesn't give us a neat resolution. It leaves us with that ambiguity, that uncertainty, which I guess makes sense since we're talking about a film that questions the very idea of certainty itself.
You know, it's interesting to think about the eye in relation to that whole screen concept, too. We talked about Blade Runner being a screen, projecting possibilities, not just reflecting our reality.
And the eye becomes like this portal, right, a way to see those possibilities, to look beyond our own limited perspective.
Like the film is saying, hey, pay attention, question what you see, challenge those assumptions about what's real, what's artificial, what's human.
Exactly. Blade Runner doesn't hand us the answers on a silver platter. It throws those questions right back at us, makes us face the ambiguity, the complexity of the world we're living in. And by doing that, it opens up these new ways of seeing, of being, new ways to understand ourselves and where we fit in this whole grand scheme of things.
It's a lot, but it's also pretty exciting. Like I'm seeing the film, seeing the world with fresh eyes,
That's the magic of a truly great film, right? It stays with you, makes you think, makes you question everything you thought you knew.
And these articles, they've given us this whole new way to understand Blade Runner, a way that moves past those familiar postmodern readings and really digs into the film's big questions about philosophy, about what it means to exist.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? And I hope it inspires you to revisit the film, to explore those themes and questions on your own.
Definitely. And a huge thank you to you, dear listener, for sharing these awesome articles. You've given us a lot to think about.
And who knows, maybe they've even planted the seeds for a better future. A future where we can see past the limits of our world and embrace all those possibilities out there.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring, and never stop questioning the world around you.
And remember, sometimes the most profound truths, they're right there, hidden in plain sight.